Grand Operations was to be the poster child game mode for Battlefield 5. Improving on the already great and widely popular operations from Battlefield 1, DICE sought to up the ante with Battlefield 5, making the experience even more all-encompassing and varied than its predecessor. Despite truly being one of the longest and most complex game modes to grace the Battlefield franchise in recent memory, encompassing a variety of different modes and spanning multiple maps and often different time and weather states, it has largely been unpopular with the game's player base and largely abandoned by its developer. While we did see the addition of one grand operation alongside Panzerstorm shortly after launch, for the most part, the game mode has seen little attention from DICE. The promised Greece operation encompassing Mercury and Merita never showed up, and despite the addition of 4 Pacific maps so far, the larger scale game mode available on them remain Conquest and Breakthrough. Now, rumor has had it for quite some time that DICE is working on a rework for the game mode, bringing it closer to what we had back in Battlefield 1 and trying to fix some of the less successful and less popular aspects of the mode. Adaptations of it were also in the works at one point for the Pacific content, with the repeated references and even explanations to the functionality of the so-called invasion game mode being found in the files. But history aside, before we jump into the finer details of what improvements DICE likely should be making to the game mode, let's go through what we know from Temporyal's data mine. As per usual here, an important disclaimer, take all of this with a massive dosage of salt. Data mining isn't just an inexact science, it also has a tendency to uncover aspects of the game long abandoned or never fully realized. Thus, as with a number of other game modes previously data mined, this could of course never actually release and follow a similar fate to the previously uncovered Invasion, Conquer and Destroy, Capture the Flag, Battlezone, and Squad Conquest game modes that never made it to the game. Alright, but what has been discovered in the game files so far? As Temporyal details, the first references to changes to the Grand Operations game mode started appearing all the way back with update 4.4 during chapter 4. The same chapter of course that saw the second Greek map, Merita, introduced and where of course we were to receive the relevant Greek themed operation. This update included references to the battalion system, presumed to be analogous with the system from Battlefield 1. Essentially, this was the mechanic that gave you separate waves if the attackers failed to overwhelm the defenders on their first attempt. Of course, in Battlefield 1, this was all tied in with the Behemoth system. If you failed to take the sector, your second and subsequent third battalion would of course spawn in with a reinforcement to better your odds. But further to the battalion system, the update saw a new version of Airborne introduced, Airborne New. Nothing is really known about it specifically, but given that Airborne is one of the aspects people have cited as problematic or unenjoyable with Grand Operations, it is unsurprising that DICE would seek to redesign at least aspects of it. Update 4.6 then came along and saw the new Operations game mode added to the files, presumably to house some of the new variants of the game mode such as the previously mentioned New Airborne. Other than that, of course, update 4.6 was more focused on undoing all the bugs that the disastrous 4.4 update brought with it, and thus not much more was found of relevance in the files. But with update 5.0, things got a little bit more interesting. A whole set of UI messages were introduced, hinting at the Battlefield 1-esque battalion or wave system making a full return to the game. Examples include lines like, "We have 2 battalions left," or "This is their last battalion," and "We have no more reinforcements left." The update also saw references to a possible proper intro finally being added for operations to set the mood and explain properly what conflict was taking place. If you think back to Battlefield 1, each operation had a separate intro cinematic with voiceover, different of course depending on the faction you were playing as and from the perspective of your supposed soldier. Thus, if you were attacking on the first of the Iron Walls operation maps, Monte Grappa, you would receive an introduction cinematic in Italian and from the perspective of an Italian soldier, opposed of course to the Austrian perspective when defending on the same map. But what about more recently then? Well, update 6.2 introduced new settings for enabling or disabling a so-called reinforcement phase in the Operations game mode. What is exactly meant by this is honestly only speculation, but possibilities include there being a phase for the defenders to build up fortifications before the enemy attacks again. Though what exactly the attackers will be doing in the meantime is of course anyone's guess. But let's be honest here, does this all really make a lick of sense? Well, the timing around the supposed abandonment of Grand Operations and work commencing on a new and improved version does seem to match, so it would at least explain why DICE never delivered on the promised Greek operation, and would also explain why the Pacific-themed invasion variant of Grand Operations never came to be. Additionally, with update 6.0, Final Stand alone was added as game mode, separating it from exclusively being tied to Grand Operations. This of course could mean DICE is contemplating adding the mode as a standalone, but at the same time could follow the same mantra as the previously mentioned new airborne mode that seems to be separated from the previous variant to allow work on improvements to continue while the older variant remains available in the current operations. Particularly interesting about the separation of Final Stand though is, however, support for basically all the game's maps, including the recently added Pacific chapters. Now there are alternative explanations for this addition. Possibly the game mode could be used as a decider to a future small-scale competitive game mode, something we know DICE, at least according to the data mines, is still working on. Now, before closing things out here, what does DICE really need to do if they want to make Operations a big success again? Pulling from what I've heard from the community but also my personal experiences, I would say the largest problem currently is the lack of support for any of the newer maps. Players want to experience the new content, and if your game mode only supports a selection of the launch maps, it is likely to of course be less popular. Especially with many of the recently released maps being far more popular than the launch offering, this problem of course is only enhanced. At the same time, what I have heard people complain a lot in regards to Grand Operations is the lack of the intro cinematics and theme settings. This was of course largely present in the alpha build of the game, if I remember correctly at least, but missing when the title launched officially in October-November. Further, I would say, drawing on my personal experiences, the Grand Operations game mode really is just unnecessarily complex, including too many different sub-game modes and variants, often not properly adopted to the map at hand, and sometimes even exclusive to that operations, given the recent cancelling or temporary nature of modes such as Frontlines and of course Rush. So what do I think DICE need to do? Well, they need to go over the map selection and make the necessary changes for balance purposes, strip out a lot of unnecessary game modes and go back to the multi-stage breakthrough-like mode that we had in Battlefield 1, adding proper cinematics if possible and expanding on the existing time and weather variants that are on display, for example, on Panzerstorm and Navik in the first sectors and game modes there. With all that, alongside of course the support for newer maps, I think you'll see players return to the mode and once more become relatively popular. As we gear up for Chapter 7 and the rumoured Allied landings in Normandy, whenever they actually end up releasing, given the current public health crisis, this revised and revitalised Operations mode could of course still be a great surprise in store for all of us. Now, that pretty much wraps it up for the rumoured Operations rework. Share your own opinions down below. If you enjoyed the video, rating would be much appreciated. But with all that being said, I'd like to thank you very much for watching and hope to see you in the next Battlefield 5 video.